And so with me, I can't think of a better group of people to discuss this with. We're very privileged to have a group of outstanding leaders from the Amnesty movement. And so immediately on my left is Anna Piquer. Anna Piquer is the regional director for Amnesty International's Americas region. And Anna Piquer studied law at the University of Chile. She completed her master's degree at New York University. She began her career as a labor and employment lawyer. She's a lifelong human rights defender who first joined Amnesty International as an activist in Chile in 1990. And later became chair of the board of the Chilean section. She then later became the executive director of Amnesty International Chile in 2011 and oversaw major human rights work in the country, including leading the organization's response to the social uprising of 2019 and the campaign for justice for the violent repression of the protests. Welcome, Anna. Also with us is Edith Olivares Ferreto, who's the executive director of Amnesty International Mexico. Edith has worked with various international organizations, including UN agencies, the National Institute for Women, the National Commission to Combat and Eradicate Violence Against Women, and mechanisms for the advancement of state and municipal women. She has been a speaker in various programs on gender and public policies, planning with a gender perspective and policies to address violence of the Latin American Faculty of Social Sciences, as well as the Simone de Beauvoir Leadership Institute, as well as state mechanisms for women at the state and municipal level. She has also taught at the National Women's Institute and Matias Romero Institute of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Edith, welcome. Bienvenida. Bienvenida. And Edith is accompanied by an interpreter who will help us interpret into English, and her name is Nancy Prada. Thank you, Nancy. And then last but not least, Paul O'Brien. He is the executive director of Amnesty International USA. Over his career, he has done human rights research and advocacy in more than 50 countries, including most recently in Mexico, Israel, Gaza, and the West Bank. He lived for 10 years in Africa, working for local and international organizations, and for 5 years in Afghanistan. Before Amnesty, Paul co-led Oxfam's worldwide influencing network advocacy efforts during the COVID pandemic, and he led Oxfam's America's advocacy with the US government and corporations. Paul has been an advisor to the president of Afghanistan, the Africa Policy Advisor for CARE, and an organizer in Nairobi's informal urban settlement. He was the president of the Echoing Green Foundation and a litigator in New York for Cravath, Swain and Moore. He has a JD from Harvard Law School, and before joining Amnesty, he published Power Switch: How Can We Reverse Extreme Inequality? Welcome, Paul. And I think I will start with you, Paul. First of all, well, welcome all of you to Canada. And how are you? You've just had an incredible 100 days. How are you and your team doing? And I think beyond that, could you tell us what the last 100 days have been like? We've been watching them from, of course, from here, from Canada, with a very particular lens. But what have they meant to you, your work, the work of your team, and the work of your colleagues in the US?
Thanks, Ketty. It's really good to be here, and this is just an amazing space, and it's great to see you all and to have spent a little time with my colleagues. It really feels good to be part of Amnesty in this moment. How am I? I'm motivated. This guy's got our attention. I think we thought we were ready. We did all the plans, we had them all ready, and we had the, what if Trump takes the White House, and the Republicans and the anti-rights parts of the Republicans win the Senate and the House. Yeah, we're ready, we got a plan, and we weren't ready. We just weren't. We had a concept of it, but we didn't fully understand at the time that he was going to hire people around him, not for their capacities or their expertise or their ability to say, well, actually in the United States' best interests, you might want to not do that, or actually bring substantive expertise. He hired a bunch of sycophants and loyalists, and we weren't prepared for that. And then we weren't prepared, honestly, even though we knew he was going to, quote unquote, hit the ground running, and they'd made all these big declarations, and you've all heard about Project 2025, right? These 312 reforms that they were going to push on through. But we didn't think that by yesterday, he would have passed 137 executive orders and only submitted 5 bills to Congress. What does that mean? It means that of those 312 things that Project 25's, this toxic manifesto of anti-rights aspirations, 99 of them are already complete, and more than 60 of them are substantially complete. That's half the agenda they were going to do in 4 years, already done in 100 days. And honestly, even though protests are emerging, they're not emerging fast enough. And let's not forget the other side of that equation. They had a Republican Senate, they had a Republican House. If they wanted to, as the people say, pour concrete and get lasting reforms, they would have put bills, if they'd been preparing, to Congress, let them vote on it and sign them into law so that they'd have some lasting impact. Did they do any of that? No. 5 bills. They're not even interested in the other branches, except the extent to which, if they're threatened by the other branches, they can diminish their influence and power. Which is why when the courts push back, they target individual judges. So we have a very anti-rights administration that is all the things that Agnès said, and it's come with a plan. And the plan is a deeply anti-rights plan. And it is our belief, sitting in the United States, that there is method in how they started. If the first chapter of the authoritarian manifesto, whatever it is, was start with muzzle velocity, flood the zone, overwhelm them with so many different things that while they're trying to defend one right, you can push 5 different anti-rights proposals through. The second chapter is pick your targets carefully and do it in a way that creates more public tolerance and acceptance and apathy to accept even more anti-rights behaviors in the future. So what do they announce on January 20th, on the first day? We'd like to explore the use of the Insurrection Act on the southern border that will give me, the president, the authority to deploy US soldiers on American soil. Now, if you ask your average American, how do you feel about 18-year-old Marines with huge weapons wandering around their towns and cities? They'll say, no, thanks very much. Americans don't like soldiers on their soil. But if they're being deployed to stop an invasion on our southern border, which was the supposed articulation, then Americans were like, okay, we're up for that because we don't want bad people coming. And of course, they've been told nonstop that anybody who's seeking sanctuary in the United States must be bad. So the Insurrection Act logic was we need soldiers on our streets in order to defend ourselves against a foreign invasion. Secretary Hegseth, please give us your opinion. And of course, Secretary Hegseth's opinion is, it's very reasonable, Mr. President, that you would want to do that. If this happens, and now he's got this advice, if it happens, and there is no invasion for all sorts of other horrible reasons, but there's not even the possibility of a manufactured invasion for now, but it will happen in the coming months that he claims he needs to use this act. If it happens in that context, then wait for it to happen to break up union strikes or on college campuses, or to when people are on the streets protesting racial injustice, to bring soldiers into those spaces and shoot through homes. It is a clear plan to create tolerance and permissive space for more. Why did they go after Mahmoud Khalil on a Columbia campus? For peacefully protesting the rights of Palestinians. Think of all the things you can do now that he's been deported. Every single green card holder in the United States knows that if they say the wrong thing that annoys the government, the President and the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, have said, if we don't like what they're saying, we'll just kick them out. Every single college campus says, if we protest peacefully, even peacefully, and we annoy this administration, we may lose our immigrant status. Every single lecturer on the Columbia campus who is not a US citizen, even a green card holder or a visa holder, is worried for their status now. I've heard this directly from them. I don't know that it's every single one, but certainly the vast majority are. What they are doing with these cases, it's the same with Kilmar Abrego Garcia. You take one individual and you claim that you're within your rights to deport them because he was wearing the wrong color hat, because he might be a gang member. And not just deport him, but disappear him. Literally put him in a prison and get the president of El Salvador to sit beside you and say, yeah, he's not going anywhere, he's not coming back. He is literally disappeared now. You do that with an asylum seeker who had done nothing wrong, and the president is asked in that same moment with Bukele, would you do that to a US citizen? And he says, if they were bad enough, by his definition of bad enough. And everybody's watching this. And there are no protests on the streets. Well, there are, but there aren't enough. There aren't enough. So in our view, doing human rights work in the United States, as part of this family, we are seeing them try to shift the range, which is a classic deal maker's tool of what is acceptable political behavior, what people will tolerate. And they're willing to accept some level of protests. They're willing to accept some level of public dissatisfaction. But they are responsive to what people think. They care about it. So our view in response is, what do? We do precisely the opposite. We build a pro-rights constituency of people who say, not on our watch. We help to connect the dots between these individual early action cases of things that people may not fully appreciate what it means, and make the case that if you let Mahmoud Khalil go, if you allow Abrego Garcia to be disappeared, who are they going to come for next? And make the connection back to the activists and citizens and those who are ready to be motivated and mobilized around a pro-rights agenda. I think we are wrong to expect that what we need is an equally charismatic pro-rights political leader in the United States. I'm not sure we have that candidate now. Obviously, there are people like Bernie Sanders and AOC who are bringing a lot of people out onto big demonstrations and speeches. But I think we are wrong as pro-rights activists to wait for the one leader or one group of leaders. I've sat with a lot of politicians, including Democratic politicians, who've said, we don't have the wherewithal to find a common, clear political alternative to what's going on yet. We need civil society to wake up. And so that's what we're spending a lot of our time doing. Our theory of change is simple. The Trump administration is not going to listen to the classic forms of human rights work. It's not going to listen to research. It's not going to listen to clear facts. It does not care about being informed about the human consequences or the rules-based consequences of its actions. It is, as Agnès said, vandalizing institutions and dehumanizing whole populations. It doesn't care. We, if we're going to make any difference as a group of pro-rights activists, are going to have to increase the costs of what they do. We are going to have to make it less politically possible for them to take anti-rights actions and face no consequences. And we don't have long. We talk a lot in the United States now about what's going to happen by the midterms. Can we build a pro-rights constituency by the midterms? But I will tell you, there's a lot of people who think we don't even have until the midterms, that they will not be a safe election. And even if we had a Democratic Congress, would it be able to put the kinds of checks and corrections on an out-of-control anti-rights administration. So it is certainly a time, if you're a human rights worker in the United States, that has our attention. We are, obviously, Amnesty is an incredibly powerful movement to be a part of. It's one of the things that has been deeply inspiring is to listen to our colleagues around the world take actions against authoritarian practices and to specifically name the Trump administration all around the world in ways that have made a big difference in terms of people understanding the power and relevance of Amnesty. In the United States, we're having 4,000 new activists join us every week. And this has been happening now for months. They're coming because they want to be given agency that is relevant, and they want to be given information, and most importantly, they want to lead themselves. They want to be given space and resources and being allowed to share their ideas, to bring forward at the local and state level and in other forms of national level protest and engagement, to bring a message that we are a pro-rights community and we're going to stand with others. But the big news for us really is that if we are going to be that if we're going to build that politically relevant people power in the United States, it is all about working well with others and working well with people who choose to spend their time and energies fighting for a pro-rights agenda, even if they're not being paid. Our professional staff is solid. I'm incredibly proud of them, but they're a fraction of the power that Amnesty USA has. We have 240,000 members. We have 300,000 people who take actions with us through digital spaces. It is our ability to be relevant to them, to be useful to them, to give them the kinds of materials, resources, and guidance that they feel that they're taking relevant action. And perhaps most importantly of all, it is our collective ability to be relevant to other groups where they feel like, thank you, Amnesty, we want to be in partnership. We want collectively to build a pro-rights movement. So we're increasingly spending time with about 25 internationally oriented human rights organizations and a growing number of domestic, largely civil rights organizations from whom we have so much to learn, who have been doing human rights work in the United States far longer than us, and who we feel very privileged to be able to sit in solidarity with and sign pacts of solidarity with, and hopefully increasingly show up more and more. But I'll say one last thing. When we sit with all these partners and say, together we are going to build a citizen-centered, people power, and politically relevant movement that increases the costs for the Trump administration, the one thing that all these groups say to us is the special sauce of Amnesty, is the fact that Amnesty USA is part of a movement of people that is in Canada and in Mexico and across the global south and in many countries in Europe. And that possibility of a community of pro-rights activists saying to their own governments, you too better stand up, because his crowd of loyalist sycophants are never going to tell him that anything he's doing is wrong. It's up to our heads of state, it's up to our publics to say, we are going to increase the costs of unaccountable power abuse wherever we see it. Right now we're seeing a lot of it in the United States, so we're going to increase those costs, but we are not going to stand idly by. And I do feel cautiously hopeful that this movement is going to build and build and build in the years to come. And I feel it a lot more sitting in this room, seeing all of you here, taking your time on an evening. We're going to get there, and it's going to be hard work, as Agnès says, but we're going to get there because we choose to spend time in community. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you for being with us, Paul. Thank you for that picture, but also for the seeds of hope you're planting. I mean, earlier today, we were talking to the Canadian government about how it intends to protect human rights defenders from the United States, a conversation that we would not have thought we would have to have at this stage. And now really everything has shifted, and we certainly have to act really differently. I want to turn to you, Edith, to talk about what the Trump administration has meant for Mexico. Mexico. Obviously, you and us, Mexico and Canada, have probably been the most targeted by the Trump administration. What has that meant for you for the migrant crisis in Mexico, for human rights generally in Mexico?
Gracias. Yo voy a hablar en español y agradezco mucho a mi intérprete que me va a permitir también comunicarme con ustedes en mi lengua. Y yo quisiera iniciar, sí, tú me avisas, ¿no? Quisiera iniciar comentando que la llegada del presidente de mi compañero toma a México en el medio de una gran crisis de derechos humanos que lleva por lo menos 5 décadas.
First of all, I will speak in Spanish, and I thank the interpreter to help me to be understanding. I would like to start saying that the arrival of the new president of my colleague here arrived in the middle of a huge crisis in Mexico that was lasting for the last 5 years.
5 decades.
5 decades.
Sí. Justamente el 29 de abril que presentábamos el informe en México, comentamos hace muchos años que estamos en una crisis de derechos humanos. Pero una crisis es un periodo como coyuntural y ya hablamos en México de una situación estructural, de una condición estructural de violaciones generalizadas y sistemáticas de derechos humanos.
Last April 29th, we were talking about a lot of human rights violations and have been lasting for many, many years.
Una condición estructural.
And it's a structural condition.
Y bueno, tal vez como para, digamos, caracterizar esta condición, tiene que ver con la desaparición de más de 127,400 personas que están en este momento desaparecidas en México. Solamente en el mes de abril desaparecieron 1,050 personas.
So one of the things that we have been talking, it's in the last year, more than 1,027,400 people disappear in Mexico, and only in April, in the month of April, 1,050 people disappear.
Además, a las personas en México, las personas desaparecidas no las busca el Estado, sino que las buscan sus propias familiares, especialmente mujeres. Más del 90% de quienes buscan a sus familiares desaparecidos son mujeres.
And besides that, the people who disappear in Mexico are not researched by the states or by the country. Most of the people who search those disappeared persons are the families, and 90% of the people who research for these disappearing persons are women.
Estas mujeres están además en una gran cantidad de riesgos. Al menos 29 personas buscadoras han sido asesinadas. Solamente durante el mes de abril fueron asesinadas 4 personas buscadoras.
And those women are in a high risk level, and more than 29 have been killed. And just for the April, 4 of them were killed.
Además, México es un país que, como sabemos, está azotado por la inseguridad, tanto del crimen organizado como de militares que están ocupando las tareas de seguridad pública.
And besides Mexico, there is a country who has the organizing crime, but also the militarization, who are taking care of the public security.
Es un país en donde la defensa de los derechos humanos y el periodismo son labores de alto riesgo, el país más peligroso para el ejercicio del periodismo en todo el hemisferio occidental.
And also, it's a country that it's the most risky for the journalists and for the right activists, pro-right activists and human rights activists.
Desafortunadamente, además, hemos visto que en los últimos años hay un proceso de cierre del espacio cívico caracterizado por un cierre del diálogo con las organizaciones de la sociedad civil y las víctimas de violaciones a derechos humanos.
Unfortunately, last year has been struck by the closing of dialogues on civic rights and the conversations with the authorities.
¿Qué podría cambiar con el gobierno de Trump? Nuestras principales preocupaciones están en el reforzamiento de la militarización, que ya inició con la negociación arancelaria que hizo el gobierno de la presidenta Sheinbaum con el gobierno de Trump, a través del cual envió 10,000 soldados a la frontera a cambio de no incrementar los aranceles para México.
Well, what we ask or what we think that will be changed with Trump administration is the reinforcement of militarization with the new laws that have been taken with the new president of Mexico, and there is already have been taking place with 10,000 soldiers that have been moved to the borders just to calm the tax increase.
Además, el gobierno de México está acompañando la política antiinmigrante que propone o que sigue proponiendo el gobierno de Trump, lo cual está generando más presión en la frontera, en un país en donde hay más de 350,000 solicitantes de asilo.
And also, Mexico have been it's reinforcing the anti-migrants laws in a country that it's receiving now more than 350,000 demands of asylum.
Pero yo voy a terminar con un aspecto positivo a propósito de lo que decía nuestra secretaria general.
But I will finish my intervention with a positive point in regards with our General Secretary was explaining before.
Si ustedes quieren encontrar esperanza y coraje, lo van a encontrar en las calles en México.
If you would like to find hope and courage, you will find those things in the streets in Mexico.
El día 26 de cada mes, los padres y las madres de los 43 estudiantes desaparecidos en Ayotzinapa salen a exigir al Estado mexicano que encuentre a sus hijos.
Every month, on the 26th of every month, the families of the 46 people who were killed,
Disappeared.
Who disappears, go on the streets to ask the government to look for them, to look and to demand to look for those people who disappear.
El próximo 10 de mayo, el Día de las Madres, vamos a acompañar a las madres de las personas desaparecidas en México en todas las ciudades del país.
On May 10th, that it's a Mother's Day, we will accompany all the women and mothers who will go on the streets asking to the government to find for the daughters and who disappear.
Los 8 de marzo. Los 8 de marzo, los 25 de noviembre, las mujeres estamos en las calles exigiendo también que acabe la impunidad y los feminicidios.
And every March 8th and November 25th, the women are on the streets asking for new laws for the disappeared people.
For the feminicides.
And for feminicides.
Bueno, y Amnistía, por supuesto, está con ellas en las calles y agradecemos que sabemos que ustedes también están con ellas.
And of course, we know that Amnesty is with them also on the streets, and you are with them on the streets.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you, Edith, for that dose of hope. I want to turn to you, Anna. You oversee, obviously, our work across the Americas region. And there can be a tendency to see Trump as one phenomenon, and particularly from here in Canada, to see what's happening as just related to that particular individual, Donald Trump. But we know that what has been unfolding in the United States is not necessarily unique and is not necessarily only Trumpian, but that Trump is only the manifestation of practices that are happening across the Americas. So could you talk about those and what of course, the arrival of Trump means in terms of the decrease in human rights protection?
This one? Yeah, thanks. I have a colleague at the office who is from Cuba. She hasn't been able to go to Cuba for a very long time, of course, for political reasons. And she currently works with Amnesty at the regional office. And when she started watching what was going on with, not only in the United States, in other countries, she sees how a country is moving towards an authoritarian tendency. And she half-jokingly says, well, I come from the future, and I can tell you what is going to happen next. And I think there is something to that, in terms that we can truly learn. I'll borrow Agnès' metaphor of the seeds, how we can see seeds planted that both go for human rights, for hope, for a future, which is what we want, and also these seeds of authoritarianism. And in the Americas, we can quite clearly see how in some countries these seeds are maybe still more dormant, while in other countries they have grown into full forests. And so we have, in probably the most authoritarian side of the spectrum, we have the cases of Nicaragua or Cuba, where people simply no longer can actively oppose the government. Most of the opposition and the resistance is happening outside of those countries because people weren't able to stay. Even in the case of Nicaragua, many were stripped of their nationality. So they were left stateless by their own government. Venezuela is another example, and Venezuela is a case where we are living a crisis within a crisis within a crisis. When you thought things couldn't get worse for the opposition, they did after the latest elections. And we were recently seeing a new crackdown against opposition, against NGOs, against whomever sounds like opposed to what Maduro's government wants to do. And we are seeing also in other countries, in Venezuela, but also in other countries, the advancement of legislation that is making the life of organizations much more difficult, of NGOs, even Amnesty sections. We have seen that last year in addition to Venezuela, in Paraguay, this year in Peru, where openly anti-NGO legislation has been passed by Congress, promoted by government, and will increase the requirements in terms of the information that needs to be given, of the financing that the organization can receive, and that can effectively limit or even quash the possibility of some organizations to even function in those countries. We also have seen for many years now the repression of protests. Maybe the most recent example has been in Argentina under Milei's government, where they passed a regulation of protests that basically forbids any protest that impedes the transit of vehicles. So that's any protest. No, yeah. And we have seen also criminalization of leaders, of people who are somehow bothering the government. We've seen that in Guatemala, for example, with lawyers and prosecutors and former people who worked in the judiciary, but also here in Canada. We've seen the criminalization of indigenous leaders. We've worked with the Wet'suwet'en people, and we've seen how that plays out. Stigmatization is another thing that you can see in almost every country, how those discourses that come both from governments, but also in the online spaces that are very deliberately sometimes created to stigmatize the work of certain organizations or of certain people and recreate them as terrorists, as against the interests of the country. So that's why I like the metaphor of the seeds, because it's not something you see from one day to the other. It's not like in the 70s, 80s that you got a coup d'etat and at the next day all freedoms had ended. Right now, what we are seeing is something much more gradual, and for that reason, much more insidious. That's the word I'm looking for. Thank you. So what's interesting is that when Trump arrived, it seems like all the attention was towards this, which I think is somehow is an opportunity. Because at last we have everybody's attention that this is happening and this is something that needs to be resisted. The problem with Trump is that it is somehow creating an environment where this is allowed. So it gives, even indirectly, even if he doesn't say anything, it gives support to people who want to install authoritarian practices because the US is doing it. And maybe the biggest, baddest example of this is El Salvador, where Bukele's government has been installing gradually also severely authoritarian practices. He has basically control of the three powers of the state. It has been starting to persecute opposition and organizations, stigmatizing organizations who speak against them, criminalizing or persecuting journalists. And now, not only the implicit validation comes from the US, but a very explicit validation when the Trump government says, we're going to send people to El Salvador's prisons, and to a prison that was deliberately built as a machine to mistreat and torture people. So it's actually terrifying to see how that is playing out. I want to add one final mention, and I think, no, two final mentions, sorry. One is that there are some countries I haven't mentioned that it's even more complex in a way, because it's not that the state is openly installing authoritarian practices, but where organized crime, where different powers that are not the state are so pervasive that makes the space for civil society very limited and very risky. Mexico is an example, as Edith was explaining. Colombia is another example. And maybe the most extreme one is Haiti, where there are civil society organizations doing amazing work under the most extreme conditions right now. And the last point, and this is really the last point, I promise, is that is the fact that the crackdown on migration that Trump is doing is also affecting this whole panorama, because it's not that things were good before for people who were seeking asylum from all these countries I've mentioned who have been persecuted, but with Trump's multiple executive orders and decisions regarding migration, people who traditionally tried to arrive to the US in search for safety currently don't have a chance. We went actually to the border, and what we found is that at the US-Mexico border right now, there is no right to asylum at all. There's no way to claim asylum in the US. And if you add to that the fact that the temporary protection programs and different parole programs are all coming to an end, that might mean that many people who come from these authoritarian countries will be sent back to the most dire conditions. So that's another thing where there is an effect in the whole region, and where we are hoping that other countries will be able to step up in giving protection to those people. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Anna. So I'll ask one question. I'll ask you all to respond briefly so we can go to the audience and hear what you all have to say, or what questions you have. And let's make it really clear that the playbook of authoritarianism that you are referring to, its seeds are also present right here in Canada. So when you look at that playbook, things like the attack on the media, the spread of disinformation, the threat or the actual use of the notwithstanding clause, for instance, and other forms of legislation in order to really bypass human rights obligations. The narratives around refugees and asylum seekers as being the reasons why, we have the economic challenges and the housing crisis that we have in Canada. These are all part of what we see across the world. And the recent elections have just shown us how polarized the country is. Let's make no mistake, yes, we have avoided certainly a very populist conservative government. However, 41% is an incredible gain. And what was particularly interesting and concerning statistic is the gain within the young, and particularly the young men population, the 18 to 24. So these messages are resonating with an audience that has concerns around its housing, its economic status, and so on and so forth. And these messages are really resonating deeply. So my question to all of you is, how then do we resist? How does the ordinary person who's worried about their day-to-day survival really resist in these times and against these enormous forces? What are some of the strategies? I'll start with you, Agnès, because you have put out a call of resistance. But how exactly do we resist? And can we get a bit more granular about what that looks like in 2 minutes?
Hello. Yeah. Well, this is indeed the most complex question. We need to invent new methods and new forms of mobilization and different ways of communication so that those young men you were talking about can be convinced, at least some of them, to move away. They may not come to us, but at least to move away from where they are right now. So what are we doing at Amnesty? It is clear to me that a resistance to be effective, given how insidious the authoritarian practices and thinking are, we really need to unleash all the forces. Amnesty is a fairly centralized, some will say almost militarized organization. You know, you all supposed to speak the same way, to use the same words, to follow the same policy, and so on and so forth. I'm trying certainly right now to advocate that for resistance to deliver impact, it must be dispersed and decentralized, and that we cannot control all aspects of how resistance is going to take place. It doesn't mean I don't want responsibility or I'm trying to say do whatever you want. I'm just being very clear that resistance needs to take place in every dimension of the life of a society, and that every individuals need to resist in their families, in their work, in their community, and so on and so forth. So we need to find ways of unleashing the individual forces of all Amnesty member. That's the first thing. So at the moment, we're really trying to think through what that dispersed, decentralized resistance will look like. The other one we know how to do. The coordinated one, the one based on in-depth research with long list of recommendations for action, for advocacy, that we're going to continue to do, focusing in particular on the United States. So we're working on a new project, and also at global level around protection of the UN and calling on people to do pledges and so on and so forth. So the key thing for me is really how are we going to unleash toutes les forces vives, comme on dit, all the real strong forces within society. I think two particularly important entry points are first the online world. We have not been very successful in contributing to the formation of public opinion online. It is not just Amnesty, it's everyone. This is an incredibly important space for opinion, public opinion making. It is a space that is poisoned by algorithm. It is a space that is poisoned by certain business model. We know all of that, but we don't yet have the effective tools to balance what's happening online, and we've got to break that. We absolutely need to do so. We need to produce more content out of our bubbles. We need to engage with those who spread hatred. So I'm hoping that within the next year or 2 years, we will find ways of finding 100 champions online, people who will be getting some loose instructions, but their main objective will be to be present, to interact, to respond, to make sure that those who are living in their own bubbles, that we enter that bubbles. We cannot let the algorithm run the show as well, and we need to continue to really denounce the working of the algorithm. We need to consider whether we've got to have a campaign on transparent algorithm. It will be a beginning, but not sufficient. And then we really need to strengthen the group. The role of the Amnesty Group, it is really the base, the heart of Amnesty, the pulse of Amnesty. How do we ensure that those groups can be as strong in their resistance as they are when they write letters? How can they become actors in their community to resist? Of course, they do that by writing letters and working on individuals, and that's fantastic. But I think we need to find ways of strengthening their role so that they can become the actor of resistance everywhere. We can give them arguments and things that they can do, but we need also to unleash the forces of the Amnesty groups. In a nutshell, everyone's responsibility will be to resist. And we will be there, we'll have their back, we'll be there to offer protection, to offer materials, to offer ideas, to offer collectivity, to offer friendship, and to make sure they never resist alone.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to hold on to your thoughts. We'll use them. We'll wrap up with those. But let's hear from the audience and take any questions and let's try to make them questions, not comments. I know there's a lot that we would like to comment on. Let's make them questions.
Oui, bonsoir. Good evening to everybody. Thank you to be there. My question is for Madame Callamard. In fact, I got 3 questions, very simple questions. The first one.
One question.
Only one?
Yes, only one, so we can hear others.
Okay. I'll drop 2. Pope Francis declared that if you believe in the gender ideology, then as a consequence, you're promoting the destruction of the individual, the person, the society, and the family. And that's the origin of many of our problems right now. Is Amnesty International promoting that kind of ideology? Thank you.
Okay. Yes, we'll come back to it. Could we take maybe a couple more questions?
I guess this is a question for a few of the panelists, but I've noticed there's been this discussion about increased fear and the consequences being more and more dire for human activists, including, as Ketty mentioned, starting to consider Canadians traveling abroad to other countries and the risks they might face there in less democratic countries. What are strategies or what are ways that we and activists can help protect each other in these spaces where we don't have that assurance? And how can we ensure that that's protected in a world where it's more and more necessary to stand up, but more and more dangerous? Thank you.
Thank you. There's another question at the front. First row. Oh, go ahead, Gauri. Just hang on one second. There's a question at the back that will come to you. Yes. The mic was coming to you. Yeah.
Sorry, friend. I accidentally sat in the correct row beside the other speaker. From your friends at the Canadian Council for Refugees, just a huge thank you to the panel for sharing thoughts that were both like tough to hear, but absolutely inspiring and inspirational about how we need to work together. My question is, without revealing too much, as I know you had a series of meetings today with officials, your call that is so important for people, many people in Canada who are working not only to fight human rights violations and injustices in many dimensions in our own soil, but to be pushing our leaders to think about their obligation as an international community to be standing up against, for example, President Trump, many, and of course so many, President of El Salvador, there are many that come to mind. I think that is extremely important because of the impunity of international actors and because still of the relative weakness in the UN system. So my question is, to the extent you can share, what can you share with us about how much homework we still have to do with new government or the officials, since our government is kind of brand new? Or were you encouraged at all by this call that you gave them to think about the importance of their voice to call to account President Trump and others? Did you find that landed in fruitful terrain? Or is there a lot more work we still need to do here?
Thank you very much. I would like to know how you think you could propose utilizing universities and high schools as incubators, not only for the community, but to stimulate and educate those young people. And ancillary to that, in communities where there are no units of Amnesty International, how would you propose presenting yourselves to those communities, whether it be online or whatever? Thank you very much.
And the question at the back? We'll take one more and then we'll have the panel answer. Yes, I have.
In 2023, Joe Biden issued an executive order about artificial intelligence and about the importance of developing a framework to manage AI's risks, unlock AI's potential for good, and promote common approaches to shared challenges in cooperation with other countries. And in January 2025, Donald Trump rescinded that order and issued a much more simplistic executive order about artificial intelligence, which simply says that America must dominate in artificial intelligence in order to promote three things that I don't think are commensurate with each other: human flourishing, economic competitiveness, and national security. And at a time when a lot of people's jobs are being negatively affected by these technologies that are controlled by a very small number of gigantic corporations, many of them American, I'm wondering if Amnesty International has taken any particular view or position on artificial intelligence as it relates to human inequality and human rights in general.
Hello, I'm Matheus Figueiredo. I'm from Brazil. And my question, first I would like to thank you, the panel, for such a good time with you. Also the event producers, it's been a pleasure. And my question is about what's the role of youth in this current scenario that we have? Because I carry on a work with the youth back in Brazil, and what we see is this common fear about what's to come, what to do, because what we are witnessing is something that it's in the high, big politics. We're seeing the president that is doing whatever he feels like doing, and as you mentioned, he has support. He's choosing the people strategically that would support his behavior and his actions. And what I would like to ask to you is what's the role of the youth in this problem, and how we can break it down from the big politics into something that we actually see ourselves taking action. We can actually see ourselves trying to do something to change. And yeah, that's it. You're such a strong group of panelists. I think your message towards the youth would be something deeply appreciated. So once again, thank you everybody for the event.
Thank you. So we'll spread these questions. I think I can answer the first one on gender ideology. Gender is not an ideology. Gender is a lived reality. And at Amnesty, we protect and defend the rights of all peoples. That's LGBTQ plus people, trans people. We believe trans women are women, and that is our position. So maybe we can get to the next question. So there's a question about how we protect each other as activists, right, in these really difficult times, and also a question about our engagement with the new government, the Carney government in Canada. Agnès, would you like to take those? Okay, so there's those. The other question is about how we plan to use universities and high schools as incubators, the role of human rights education in building the next generation of human rights defenders, which is an extremely pertinent question. There's a question on the role of AI and Trump's recent executive orders. Paul, you might want to speak to that. And lastly, and the most importantly, was the role of youth, right, in fighting back. So
I'll happily speak to the AI thing, but could I say a word about the youth and the risk? I'm sure I share with many of my fellow panelists this feeling. The feeling is that if we are going to see a rise of real agency that reminds us of what's at stake here for the long term and of what a pro-rights vision could be, youth is indispensable and probably going to lead the way. It is not without method that the campuses in the United States were targeted early, because it is often when authoritarian leadership wants to step forward, when militaristic leadership wants to step forward, it is the youth that take the front lines and are willing to put themselves in harm's way. And just to put to your question, which I think is such a deep one, I know that a lot of youth are stepping forward. We have 400 youth groups, and many of them operating on campuses around the country. They're both passionate and ready to put themselves on the line, but they're also scared and fearful for their college futures, for their immigrant status, sometimes for their physical safety, being detained, losing everything, losing their college life, losing their ability to stay in the United States. The challenging part for organizations is how to make appropriate commitments, promises, training, preparation about what it can and can't deliver. The worst thing we could do is to say, we'll be there for you no matter what, and not be. So we have to prepare ourselves to be serious and humble, because we desperately need their courage, as Agnès says. But if we promise what we can't ultimately deliver, we don't just hurt them, we lose our credibility as an organization that stands in solidarity. Now, I will say, I'll give you one example. We're partnering with the ACLU to prepare students on college campuses to use governance processes to protect protests on college campuses. And we're working well with the ACLU to create packages of training, and that we can promise. It's a serious training, it provides support, it gives students the chance to ask questions, what if this happens, what if that happens? So it's bounded, but we have to, within that, not not overstate what we can do. And so far it's gone quite well, and we're doing it in a lot of campuses, and particularly in working with youth who are directly from impacted communities, and they are providing that connection between their campus life and the communities from which they're connecting, and that is just so incredibly powerful. Maybe I'll stop there and I can come back and do an AI comment later.
Why don't you go ahead?
Okay, well, just very briefly, I think it's the right question, and I'm sorry to punt a little bit, but I think if we're not grappling with the fact that the power of AI now to affect rights, we have a remarkable group under Agnès' leadership called Amnesty Tech, which is looking at how different tools are being used in surveillance, and are doing profiling. I am particularly worried about watching what's been happening in Gaza, where essentially without any humans engaging, AI is being used to identify environments in which supposed identified individuals are residing, and then again without much human contact, decisions are made to target that space even though there are multi-generational families there. And deaths happen as a consequence. The Lavender program. This is essentially the use of AI to kill citizens without practically any human intervention. If that's where we are going, we are in such a critical moment of danger if we don't grapple with this. And it is the consequence of simplistic analysis of the power of AI. So it's deeply disturbing to be reminded about what you said.
Who would like to take the question on how to protect each other as activists and how to keep this? You could.
Yeah, I could. Okay, first, really congratulations for even asking the question. It's, I think for many of us, sometimes it dawns on us a bit late that that's something we need to think about. And it has to do with several levels, with our own energy levels and our own health, and with what the government can do to us and what others can do to us because they are not in favor of what we're doing. So the first thing is it's extremely important to have those conversations. If you're in a group of activists, if you're in an organization with Amnesty or with whomever, to openly have those conversations. What risks are we having? And do a very good analysis of what risks we're facing. What can we do to mitigate those risks? What risks we are not willing to take, because that's fair. We can decide we don't want to. I don't want to go, I don't want to be detained. And some people may be willing to, and for a good cause, and some people may not, and that's fine. It's not everybody's role to do that. So I think that's one point. And the other point is to have plans, and to include in those plans, in the world we're living now, to include digital health and all what has to do with how we communicate digitally, what we post online, what information we are providing online is becoming a huge deal. It's something that we really, really need to think about, because we went through a stage of time when we were filling quizzes in Facebook like crazy and we gave information to everybody. And there's a whole generation of us that we are already lost. But there are things we can do to protect ourselves and to ensure that our communications are safe. And the third point is that when you think about this, you need to do it as a collective. Safety is also in numbers. If we act alone, it's more likely that we're running more risks than if we are acting as a collective. And to always have a plan and revise those plans, because in the world we're living in, risks change very rapidly. And we may end up being outdated, and it's important to have those conversations repeatedly and say, okay, what has changed? What do we need to do differently? Maybe different people have come to different conclusions. Maybe some people that were before the leaders now have their energy levels are low because they're tired, and that's fine as well. So it's a multi-layered conversation that you need to have, and you need to plan and make sure that you're looking at all these things, because otherwise, for those who are activists and who are on the front lines, a lot of the time it can become very risky and very draining, and if we don't talk about it and plan for it, it can become very dangerous. So again, thank you for the question, because it doesn't have a one straight answer, but it's important to talk about it because it's something we really need to do right now.
Edith, can you go ahead and maybe also answer the question about human rights education and universities and high schools?
Yes. Bueno, yo empezaría diciendo que hay que celebrar cada acto de resistencia y cada acto de esperanza, como este que yo hago al hablar en español.
First of all, I would like to say that we have to celebrate every hope act, every resistance act, as I'm doing now, speaking in Spanish.
Nosotros venimos de un continente que tiene 500 años de personas que están resistiendo, que existen porque resisten, y creo que eso es un aprendizaje para nuestro movimiento.
We are coming from a continent who has 500 years of people who are existing for resistance.
Y creo que nuestro movimiento debe aprender de ello.
And our movement have to learn from them.
Y lo digo porque creo que para Amnistía Internacional un aprendizaje es que no siempre tenemos que estar ni en primera línea, ni al frente, ni arriba, sino a veces al lado y a veces detrás.
I'm telling you that because I think that Amnesty doesn't have to be always in the front and in the top and down. We only have to be side by side with the others.
Y en ese sentido creo que las tácticas que tiene Amnistía Internacional son, podemos activarlas para construir resistencia o para estar a la par de quienes están resistiendo.
I think that we have to build resistance and to walk along with the others who are resisting.
Y por ejemplo, la educación en derechos humanos de la que hablaban anteriormente es una gran herramienta mientras la usemos a la par de las personas que están resistiendo.
And I think that as we were speaking before, the education and human rights, it's a very good tool, and
mientras la usamos,
while we are using it,
a la par de quienes ya están resistiendo.
With the people who are resistant.
Entonces yo solo cerraría diciendo que esta mancha autoritaria,
I would finish saying that this authoritarian trend
solo se puede tener con una resistencia articulada.
We have to keep it going with an articulated resistance.
Feminista y antirracista.
Feminist and anti-racism.
Thank you, Edith. And let's wrap it up with you, Agnès. So there was a question about the meetings we had today with Canadian officials. Anything you can share about that and any hope about the days to come? Yes, we talked about it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We had two meetings with Canadian authorities. I think they were interested in what we had to say. They certainly were taking a lot of notes. I think our messages resonated with them, I will say. There were no combative interaction. There was an overall understanding that Canada needed and will, according to what we've been told, will build on its tradition of leadership on human rights protection. That, I think, was quite directly articulated, whether it's on international justice, on human rights protection more generally. There appeared to be some commitment not to make any deals which will be done on the back of human rights or values more generally. I think we got that commitment, I will say, which was a bit of a worry initially. I think the authorities are not sure how it will be done. They are very aware of the complexity of the world, of the fact that they need to stand up to Donald Trump, but they need to do it smartly. Who can they ally with? How far can they ally for? How long? What kind of collective platform can they build? I think these were some of the questions I think that they communicated. So it was, I think on substantive matters, there was an overall agreement. The problem is how are they going to do it in the world we live in, and we did not have necessarily answers to all those questions. We certainly recommended building platform going beyond the usual suspect, reaching to a couple of countries in the global south, creating alliances that are very topic-based and then move on to something else. I think, that is what we recommended. We recommended establishing a human rights ambassador as a symbolic move that will really demonstrate to Donald Trump and others that Canada means business. Same with supporting the Global Health Organization. Ketty, did I forget anything? Do you want to add anything?
No, I think you summed it up well. And I will just say that I think we had hopeful meetings. They were, we've met various officials over the years, and these were very hopeful meetings. We had their ear. They were keenly interested and very keen to keep working on these. So it's still the early days, but very hopeful at this stage. Okay, so
I'll be quick.
I already said no to Anna.
Okay,
so.
well then I won't go. You're the boss.
I'm not the boss. I just want to be mindful of everyone's time, but you're free to keep talking to, of course, our panelists. But thank you so very much for your time tonight. It's all the time we had today. We wish we could talk all evening, and maybe we will organize something that's a bit longer. And thank you again for our host for this beautiful venue. Thank you for our sound technicians. Thank you to the interpreter. Thank you to people who have served us. And a huge shout out to our incredible team at Amnesty Canada. Thank you to all of you for all the hard work in making this happen. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you.